In this webinar. Good afternoon, everyone participating in this webinar. This is Blessing Aliwekwe. I hail from the southern part of Nigeria. I work with the National Biosafety Management Agency as an assistant director and head of the Environmental Biosafety and General Release Department of the agency. My career as a civil servant started since year 2016. I was first engaged with the Federal Ministry of Environment as a scientific officer. And in 2015, I was redeployed to the National Biosafety Management Agency, where I am till today. The agency is in charge of, is the National Competent Authority in charge of genetically modified organisms. It regulates the movement and handling of genetically modified organisms in Nigeria. Thank you. Hello, did you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we heard you.
Okay, so I'm trying to share my screen. I'm trying to. Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can now. Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Since you can see my screen, let me start my presentation now. All right, good afternoon, everyone participating in this webinar. Like I said, I'm Mrs. Blessing Aliwekwe, an assistant director with the National Biosafety Management Agency of Nigeria. This is the July edition of the Bioeconomy Coalition of Africa. Because of the, okay, we'll be talking about bioeconomy and biodiversity, respecting diversity of cultures and value. Because of the limited time for this presentation, I'll quickly go through the important aspects of the topic. I have on my outline the introduction, biodiversity and bioeconomy, meaning and interconnectedness. I have the bioeconomy narratives and linkage with biodiversity. I'll go through the challenges and possibilities of integrating biodiversity values and culture in bioeconomy. There is approaches to bioeconomy. There will be bioeconomy policy recommendations, and I'll conclude. Introduction. The importance of biodiversity and bioeconomy is well understood, and it cannot be overemphasized. Despite the importance of biodiversity, there are still potential negative effects, potential negative impacts on biodiversity as a result of human activities. These negative impacts have been greatly ignored. And on the part of the formulation of bioeconomy policies, the perspectives, the opinion, and views of traditional knowledge holders, I mean the peasant populations, the smallholder farmers, the local population, has been sidelined. Ignoring these traditional knowledge holders has promoted social inequalities and has not made the process democratic. That means the issue of bioeconomy and biodiversity has not been handled in a way that respects tradition, that respects people's culture and values. Despite these criticisms about biodiversity and bioeconomy, there's still no concrete and policy-oriented suggestions as to how to better inform bioeconomic policies to make it more democratic and socially inclusive. It is because of this pitfall of traditional knowledge extraction that a more constructive engagement in this field has been called for. At the end of the engagement, we believe there will be a better future. Better future will open up for bioeconomy and biodiversity aspects that respect people's culture and values. Before we continue, let's quickly go through what we know about biodiversity and bioeconomy. Biodiversity is the diversity of life forms. It is the interconnectedness of all forms of life on our planet. We say it's the genetic diversity within species, the diversity of habitats, and the large biological units known as biomes. On the other hand, bioeconomy is an economy, is a social and economic development that depends on renewable biological resources. Bioeconomy cannot reach its full potential without healthy and productive ecosystems that involve biodiversity. Both biodiversity and bioeconomy are interrelated in many ways. The water bodies, the oceans and seas that serve as means of transportation, they house varieties of fishes, which are sources of food to us today, and also sources of some of the medications we take today. Is it the timber that is used for building? All of these are forest products. Is it for climate change? They are still important. And some of the medications we have today for COVID-19, they are also derived from marine-based substances, including the cosmetic sector. Some of the cosmetics we use today are gotten from substances that are marine-based. Now, what are the bioeconomy narratives and how are they linked with biodiversity? The existing narratives on bioeconomy include that bioeconomy is centered on biodiversity, centered on biotechnology. This narrative involves inversions using natural resources. In this case, modern biotechnology comes in. Genetic modification plays a vital role here, where insect-resistant crops are produced, insect resistance, reducing pesticide application on the environment. This is environmentally friendly. There are crops genetically modified for increased yield, meaning with little land, a bumper harvest can be recorded. There are crops that are drought tolerant. They are genetically modified to tolerate drought, which means with little supply of water, they can sprout and reproduce. There's also bioeconomy that is dependent on resources. Here, bio-based resources are used as sources of energy. Biomass is being used today as sources of energy. This is because of the side effects, the negative effects of burning fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels leads to ocean acidification. It increases wildfire, it contributes to global rising temperature, and all of these are threatening to habitats, leading to biodiversity loss. There's bioeconomy that is centered on climate change. Here, the issues of climate change is handled using natural resources. Today, our water bodies receive attention because they are used as carbon storage and for the emission of oxygen, which we breathe in today. And again, there have been afforestation programs held. This to make sure that there's all-round availability of forest trees that also help mitigate climate change effects. Now, the concept of bioeconomy has gradually gained grounds in proving that they are important in integrating biodiversity values in bioeconomy. They are important in reconciling biodiversity conservation objectives with social and economic effects. Here, there are problems that are encountered during integration of biodiversity in bioeconomy. Some of these problems encountered in low integration include one, differences in the integration of biodiversity in bioeconomic policies by global North and South countries. Global South countries are rich in biodiversity. In mainstreaming biodiversity in bioeconomic policies, they tend to focus on the monetary value of biodiversity. The governance here is mainly technocratic. It involves scientific experts. They sideline the perspectives of the traditional knowledge holders. They don't bring them on board. That is the major problem here. And again, for global North countries, they are low in biodiversity. They are not that rich in biodiversity. So in mainstreaming bioeconomy, they focus on bioeconomic policy development. All these countries, none of them take into consideration the potential negative impacts of biomass expansion, bioeconomic expansion on biodiversity. Neither do they consider the impact of international trade in renewable natural resources on the biodiversity of these biodiversity-rich countries. The next challenge that causes this low integration of biodiversity in bioeconomy is bioeconomy strategies which much focus on economic activities and technological development. Here, the assumption is that bioeconomy is completely sustainable. This strategy does not look at the potential impacts bioeconomic expansion can put on biodiversity. And then the technocratic nature of government arrangements of bioeconomy is a challenge. In most cases, during the formulation of bioeconomic policies, it's only the technical experts, the government officials, the perspective of the bureaucrats that come on board. They don't bring on board the traditional knowledge holders, I mean the peasant populations, at least to make them feel like they belong in this thing, in this case. And their exclusion has made it difficult for this process to be democratic because it has not made it easy to strike a balance between the potential benefits of biodiversity and the potential risks that may arise. The next challenge is less consideration of the relationship between biodiversity and the development of activities in bioeconomy strategies. Like I said before, there is less consideration, little attention is paid on the potential negative impacts of biomass, bioeconomic expansion on biodiversity. The major focus tends to be on the monetary potentials of biodiversity. Now, having identified these gaps, there are two major possibilities of integrating biodiversity values and culture in bioeconomy. One is integration by coordination. By integrating through coordination, there is need to avoid contradictions between two policy areas. The sense here is proactive in the sense that it involves prior identification and monitoring of those potential negative impacts bioeconomic expansion may pose on biodiversity. The assumption here is that bioeconomic policies, the use of biodiversity is not completely sustainable. So they look at those potential negative impacts, they monitor and carry out environmental impact assessment, and then provide mitigation measures as to how to curtail these potential negative impacts. The next is integration through harmonization. In harmonization, the major idea is seeking common objectives between biodiversity conservation and bioeconomic development. Here, the major factor that takes the central component of bioeconomic policy formulation is the conservation objectives of biodiversity. Now, what are the approaches to bioeconomy? There are participatory approaches for bioeconomy sustainability. One of these approaches is an increase in biomass production. This approach is meant to exclude all negative impacts bioeconomic expansion can put on the environment. It reduces agricultural inputs, it increases efficiency, it leads to the production of products that are resilient to harsh weather conditions. Here, smart farming solutions and other innovative biotechnologies are proposed. In this case, modern biotechnology, genetic modification comes into play too. There is the production of insect-resistant crops, insect resistance, meaning there's less spray of pesticides on the environment, and this is environmentally friendly. There are drought-resistant crops, meaning with little supply of water, they thrive, and we have a lot of food on ground. And there are crops genetically modified for increased yield. With little land space, a bumper harvest can be recorded. There's also a systemic approach to bioeconomy. This systemic approach does not exclude mere technology or productivity-oriented measures. It tends to bring on board both the perspectives of technocrats, the perspectives of scientific experts, the opinions of the local farmers, the peasant populations. It tends to elevate the opinions of the local farmers and tries to bring it on an equal level with those of technocrats. This mainstreaming, this systemic approach is what we know as MARISCO, the adaptive management of vulnerability and risk at conservation sites. This approach systematically assesses the vulnerability of ecosystems, including agro-ecosystem. It makes the process democratic. It promotes public acceptability of these bioeconomic policies, and it promotes public acceptability of other related innovations that may come up. The good thing about it is it makes the process socially inclusive. Then the next approach is mainstreaming or systemic approaches to local and regional policies. The mainstreaming to local and regional policies, they look at the socio-ecological, the complexity of socio-ecological systems in bioeconomy policies. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Very well. Very well.
Okay. 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 In the systemic approach to local and regional policy, the complex system of the socio-ecological complexity of involved in bioeconomic policies are being looked at. It is this socio-ecological complexity that is mainly considered before implementation of the interventions on ground. Now, what are the bioeconomic policy recommendations so far, having identified these gaps and possibilities? I want to say that to respect culture and values in biodiversity and bioeconomy, the following policy recommendations can come into play. One, societal focus should center on innovation policies. Innovation policies here could include biotechnology and biosafety policies. Biotechnology and biosafety policies will ensure safe production of biotechnology-derived crops and the safe use, movement, and handling of such crops within the environment. Like in Nigeria, concerns have been raised as to the potentials for gene flow, the potentials for pathogenicity, toxicity, the potentials for invasiveness, persistence of this biotechnology-derived crops. So our biosafety policies on ground make sure that there is safety in the handling and movement, including the use of these biotechnology-derived crops. The second recommendation here is that cooperation between countries at all levels should be encouraged. The partnership between countries, communities is highly recommended here. In one of the COP meetings, the government of the Federal Republic of Congo, the government of Brazil, the government of Indonesia announced their alliance to protect their respective rainforests. This alliance, this agreement will promote and encourage further multilateral actions and impacts. Just after that, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity came up, and this is another tool, another means of reducing or curtailing the high extinction rates of species that are already endangered. And the next recommendation is that bioeconomic principles should be based on social and ecological sustainability. Again, I'll say that the complexity of social and ecological systems should form the basis of bioeconomic policy formulations. Then there should be financial support for the acquisition of skills in the use of bio-based materials. Like our youths, we need to build capacity in our youths to use efficiently these renewable biological materials in a manner that will not impact negatively on the environment. Then policy making in respect of climate change too, it shouldn't only be science-based. It shouldn't only involve the technocrats, the scientific experts. It should also bring in the traditional knowledge holders, the peasant populations, because these peasant populations, they are blessed with wealth of experiences as to the sustainable use and management of these renewable natural resources. And excluding them will promote social inequality. It will not make the process democratic, and because it's going to be difficult to strike a balance between the potential risk and the potential benefits of biodiversity while putting up bioeconomic policies. And then local communities and indigenous peoples platform should also be maintained. The local communities today, they are known as the world's most wonderful environmental stewards. According to United Nations, they make use of 20% of the world's land space and then 80% of its biodiversity. In year 2015, having known this, the United Nations established the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform. This is to bring the local communities on board during global negotiations on issues of climate change. So here it is highly recommended that these local communities and indigenous people's platforms should be maintained. Having said that, I'll conclude by reiterating that the biodiversity and bioeconomy today are interrelated. Biodiversity forms the basis of life. Without biodiversity, bioeconomy can never reach its full potential. Bioeconomy, on the other hand, depends on healthy and productive ecosystems, which include rich biodiversity. The interconnectivity between these two forms the basis of everyday livelihood for man. And it's also important to pay attention to people's culture and values when it comes to bioeconomic policy formulation, because this will form the basis for the balancing of both areas. And the inclusion of this traditional knowledge, in addition to science-based opinions in developing bioeconomic strategies, will also pave way for social and ecological sustainability of bioeconomy. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'll say thank you for giving me your time and for listening to my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blessing. That was really an eye-opening presentation. I want to thank you so much for the time you took preparing this. When I was approaching Ms. Blessing through one of us who is also on the call, I was actually interested in an opinion of a biosafety regulator, into this aspect of the biodiversity and bioeconomy. And from her presentation, you can see a lot of relation with modern biotechnologies into how we advance the bioeconomy, but also mindful of cultures, but also, of course, not forgetting biodiversity. But here we want to focus on the cultures, on the people that live within these bioresources. And when actually I asked her to make a presentation, I also got interested in an aspect, a point of view from one of the key organizations, that is Basecamp Research. It's a company, and I think they have established a good system into this. So that is why I invited one of them as our panelist. And of course, I couldn't forget to get someone from academia to get a way how we can actually integrate some of these concepts into the skilling and also capacity building. He's a lecturer from Kenya at University of Embu. Now, I want to confirm that Professor Paul is with us. Ms. Blessing, please stay online. I don't want you to disappear. We need to hear some of your opinions in some of what we shall be discussing. I want to first confirm if Professor is with us on the call. Professor, are you with us? Because I can't seem to press you on the call. I think Professor, I recently sent him an email. He hasn't responded, but I think I want to invite Ms. Bupe at this point. Ms. Bupe, thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited to finally meet you. And we'd had a long time of exchanging emails here and there. You see what is presented here, and good enough, even from Africa. But Basecamp is, I think in the introduction, I want you to first tell us, tell some of our participants what we do at Basecamp, because it is largely what is going to give a foundation to some of what we have to discuss here. In just an opening review, what exactly do we do at Basecamp Research for our participants here? Ms. Blessing, if you could stop sharing screen.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. Yes, Ms. Bupe, you're welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. Good evening, good morning. My name is Bupe Mwambingu. I am a Biodiversity Partnership Manager at Basecamp Research. We are based in London, UK. However, personally, I'm a Tanzanian national born. I am very excited and very privileged to join you on this conversation today. So what do we do at Basecamp? Basecamp is a biotech company. We are a private entity and we focus on innovations and research relating to biodiversity proteins, so proteins from nature, that we look to design enzymes, special enzymes that are utilized in the bioeconomy or the biotech industry. So in very simple term, we bridge the gap between biodiversity and the bioeconomy. So we will talk more about how we do that later on, but for now, I'm happy to be among you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this today. And I want to request Mr. Ian, if you could take charge of our new entrants who are coming on the call. Yes, thank you. So I really are interested in what is actually being built at Basecamp Research. And good enough, last week I met Dr. Ineke Not from your company as well. He was here in Kampala, and I was so much interested in what actually is being built at Basecamp. From what is being presented by Miss Blessing, you realize a lot of running to get the economic gains, and then we forget about the local person. When I was putting up this webinar, I thought to myself, I said, we are advocating for bioeconomy development, but how about our local people? Now, in this discussion, we want to explore how are we going to develop the bioeconomy, mindful of our local communities, mindful of their values. When you see people in Africa, people call us conserved. We are conservatives. I don't know, conserved. You know, something like we have a conservative nature in us. So even when you come to give some understanding of how they could gain from nature, most of what we term as conservative nature seems to blind maybe them, according to what people define it as. So I want us to delve into what you're doing I'm going ahead with you as we wait for Professor. And please, Ian, keep on alert and check out for me if Professor Paul joins us, because we want to get a perspective of his perspective of research and academia. So from what you do, you say you're bridging the gap between biodiversity and bioeconomy. It's really interesting how you do it. But
sure. So if you can maybe for our listeners, I would like to strip it down to the basics. For those of you who are pros in this sector, please do forgive me for a second. But for the benefit of those who don't understand the bioeconomy or how it works, or how do biodiversity link to bioeconomy, especially in the perspective of the Basecamp model and activities. So first, I would like to introduce into this conversation two very important legislations, or I should say international regulations, that governs the activities within the bioeconomy or the biotech industry. And those are Nagoya Protocol, as well as the CBD, or the Convention of the Biological Diversity. This is a section within the UN. They also have what is called the Access and Benefit Sharing Principle. So the access and benefit sharing principles guide all international activities, or I should say research, whether research for academia or research for commercial purposes. The protocol calls that individuals involved in activities within the sector look at three things. One, they, before accessing genetic resources or biological resources, they must provide a prior informed consent, or PIC in short. So the prior informed consent is served to the local community or local authority managing access to that resource. We'll come back into that. Number two, we are required to make sure that we negotiate with the access providers benefits that we can share either through the research or through the commercialization. So that is usually guided or stipulated within the mutual agreed terms, or the MAT. And then thirdly, we have a requirement, obviously, and that is very much the ethics around the fact that permits have to be secured within the national legal framework. So although the Nagoya Protocol and the Access and Benefit Sharing, or ABS legislation, are an international regulation, each country has in its own right, has an ABS legislation or regulation. Obviously, there are still some countries that haven't developed their regulation or legislation as of yet. However, you have all heard of the recent development of the Global Biodiversity Framework, or the Montreal-Cumin Global Biodiversity Framework, or in short, GBF 2020, which came through in December 2022 in Montreal, Canada, which made this now law. So when we are offering access, when we are requesting access, we must also negotiate benefit sharing. So for example, if I am to come to Uganda and I would like to access a natural resource, it could be anything, as you know, biological resource. It could be a plant, it could be microbes, it could be, we could be looking at various different enzymes from nature. And the list is endless, so I won't go into that. I would be looking to speak to the National Focal Point Officer, because all parties to the Nagoya Protocol, or the CBD, would have rectified within their regulation, national regulation, an office that becomes a competent authority to regulate those kind of activity. So the National Competent Authority often sits within the Ministry of Environment or Natural Resources, or sometimes a mix of both, or sometimes a unique setup, ABS committee within the powers or the ministries that governs the resources in that country. They usually would provide clarity, legal clarity on what is required from that specific nation or country. This is where the differences appear at the moment, or the challenges are, especially among our countries within the continent. So the challenges are, there's not a one size fits all. Every country has arrived at its own legislation or regulations, and they're all at different levels or paces in developing that framework. The fact that this international regulation has only recently come into power, there's a huge discrepancy with regards to clarity on what benefits can be shared, to whom, when, how, and how that is then distributed within the nation is up to the authority within the country. Now, when a foreign entity such as Basecamp approaches an authority or national competent authority, we expect to have a clear step guidance on who to negotiate with, who is authorized to negotiate on behalf of those local communities or local groups. What are the do's and don'ts? How are the benefits to be shared, and to whom and how? However, if that guidance doesn't exist, those are missed opportunities, of course, because it means not only Basecamp, but anyone else looking to invest or to engage in bioeconomy activities with that country walks away, because one, they are not sure how to go about ethically sourcing the resources. So I'm posed already challenge number one for the policymakers on the call. You probably understand very well what I'm talking about. The policy challenge is key, I think, at the moment in Africa in developing the bioeconomy. We are all at very different stages in our nations. When it comes to benefit sharing, yes, we seek very much. It is in our bloodline at Basecamp. I'm not only saying that because I am an African by birth, and I lead the principle around access and benefit sharing. I believe in it, and not only as an employee of Basecamp, but it is within our mission at Basecamp is to ensure that we share equitable benefits with our collaborators around the world, not only in Africa. Now, we can only do that if there's clarity on who to engage with. Now, when we do have someone to engage with, and I'm speaking for countries that have already got a very established legislation in place, things are very easy, because the legislation often has a requirement for you to engage with a local in-country partner. That is a condition for the permit, to secure a permit. So when that is a condition, it works very well, because the in-country partner takes charge in leading the momentum of the activities and also the engagement on both sides. Simply because they have a better understanding of what is needed locally in those communities where the resources will be obtained from. They have the understanding of the capacity needs, whether is it training, is it technology, is it the transfer of both. This can be very well led by our in-country partner. So we look to plan, to design or develop a project plan together, but mainly led by our in-country partner. So Basecamp works with in-country partner. That is answer to your question, Peretz. And we utilize this relationship to ensure that our in-country partner guide us on the requirements, the legislation requirement within the national legislation requirement to secure permits to those samples or data, but also lead us on the benefit sharing negotiations, rather than us come with a preconception view of what we think that specific country need. For example, if I'm looking at, for example, Tanzania, and compare my home country and compare that maybe with South Africa, they are very different stages of the bioeconomy. So therefore, it will work extremely beneficial for us to take the lead from our in-country partner. So I will stop there for a second and let somebody else jump in.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, actually, you actually are answering almost all questions I had prepared for us, because I wanted us to, you see, Basecamp has developed something significant. It's actually unique. And when I was sharing with Dr. Inike, I could actually see this is actually exactly what we need to look at this Friday. That was actually last week. So when you look at exactly what you've been presenting to us, only that now at this point, we need to look at the policy development framework. And at this point, I want to invite Ms. Blessing that muted you. I mean, you talk about policy development that is mindless of people or maybe citizens' opinions on how we actually advance the bioeconomy. And for me, my question to you is, so how best, especially looking at traditional knowledge, and I will also be requesting Ms. Lupe to be preparing something about traditional knowledge. How are you integrating this in your research, in your focus to discover or develop some of the proteins from biodiversity? How are you integrating that in your research, especially now that you have an African background? But Ms. Blessing, how do we integrate traditional knowledge in policy development so that we actually bring citizens on board, especially local communities that may not actually have an understanding of some of the technical issues in policy development? How do we integrate that? Or what system have we developed in Nigeria in this case? Now that you work with the Biosafety Management Authority, at least we would also want to know, especially with the development of modern technologies, modern biotechnologies, how are we integrating traditional knowledge into policy development so that we have the local communities also taking part in policy construction? Ms. Blessing, you could.
Yes, let me unmute.
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can hear you. How are we integrating traditional knowledge? Yes.
Yeah, in Nigeria, before a particular policy is finally approved, it passes through different stages. Once the draft has been submitted to policymakers, before it's submitted to the policymakers, it goes through series of meetings. Each time a meeting is held on a particular policy to be brought on board, we invite technical experts, we invite farmers association, the indigenes. If it's rice, we invite chairman of rice association, if it's cassava, we invite them, and we make them to come down to the state capital. They give us their own opinion about that policy, what we want to do. And in every step, we carry them along. There's no meeting that is being held in Nigeria without these indigenous people being part of it. No meeting at all. Once it has to do with bioeconomy, we bring them on board.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think it's so much lovable. I think it is quite similar to what I've had to our neighbors here in Kenya, also having such a kind of forum where they engage the local communities in their policy development. And I think as Africa, we need to start, looking at this. How actually do we involve our local communities in almost all policy, not just the bioeconomy? And I'm going to be going to Ms. Bupe. I'll ask you a question, which you're going to be responding to. But before, as I come back to you, Blessing, I want you to be thinking about what bioeconomy roadmap do we have in Nigeria? At least, I don't know if Nigeria has had any development in policy along that line. I want to know what's happening in Nigeria. At least the other day we had someone from Namibia, and they had a draft of this policy in place. So in this meeting, at least our participants would want to know the status of the bioeconomy in Nigeria, especially at the policy level. How are we at that stage? Ms. Bupe, how are we integrating traditional knowledge in some of this research we are doing and discovery of proteins? And also, I want you to comment on benefit sharing in that regard, because here you're looking at people's previous behaviors informing on new proteins or new active compounds that could be integrated in the model, maybe medicines and so on. So
yeah, so I would like it first of all to clarify, perhaps, Basecamp does not incorporate a traditional knowledge in its innovation. There must be a misunderstanding there. So to clarify, Basecamp focus is on microbes or microbial diversity. And the microbes that we are focusing on, we then take that, so that will be a part of the biological genetic resources. So let me go back a step. There are three types of resources that one can access. So you've got the natural biological resources, which includes plants and microbes and so forth. Or you can have a traditional knowledge of, you've explained that this is knowledge practices of cultures and tribes, beliefs and so forth, which we don't incorporate. And then also you've got the IPLC, which stands for Indigenous People and Local Community beliefs. So those are three very distinctive different areas. And you'll find that with the legislation or regulations within the country, they will have rules to define the three. A utilization of the three, or the combination of two out of those three. So in the case of Basecamp, because our focus is only on microbes and mainly from the environment, we don't incorporate traditional knowledge. So we'll then extract the DNA of the microbes, and then we use the DNA extract to develop digital sequence information, or DSI in short. That's a term that was adopted during the negotiations for the international law. So the DSI, or the digital sequence data, is what Basecamp trades through its specially developed platform. So this is a private and a closed database of this microbial digital sequence information, which the commercial partners can now look at that data and incorporate in their product innovations and developments. So nowhere in our R&D, research and development, do we include the traditional knowledge. To go back a step, For the areas where traditional, or I should say indigenous people and community governs the resources, the natural resources that includes microbes are, we hope that the ABS legislation within that country clearly can then filter the applications and define what is being guided or guarded by the communities, and what are the peak requirements as well as the benefit sharing. But because Basecamp does not utilize the indigenous knowledge, often that is an area that in our application form, we would have not ticked simply because it doesn't come into our value chain or developments at all. For areas where we're talking about guardians to the resources for the purpose of PIC or prior informed consent, for the commercialization element of our research, we of course take benefit sharing requirement, and then it's up to the regulators to inform us of the criteria to meet and the requirement to meet benefit share with either at the national level or at the local level through our in-country partner. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, really, because I think maybe probably at missed that on the microbial biodiversity, to which is focused for this camp research, and I think it now makes actually the most sense. As Professor Paul joined us, because I'm just seeing an email from him. I need to be sure he's with us. So yes, I want really to appreciate you really for that clarity, and you could actually see. Well, yeah. So he can't join us. He can't join us today. You can actually see from what Basecamp really is doing. If we can actually integrate this into some of these other biological resources, that is the natural biological resources, looking at indigenous knowledge and the local communities and all that. I think this arrangement is what I really appreciate about what is being described here at Basecamp Research. And I want to say, I think I've had some development here in Uganda. I think there's some research probably Basecamp is undertaking with one of the organizations here, to which I'm also partner with. I think I really relate with what you talk about with the national focal points and permits and all that, and it's really lovable. And I think national systems are always established to have local communities benefit at the end of the day. But I want to now go to Ms. Blessing, and she tells us what steps are we at in the bioeconomy policy development, and this would also actually inform also on how actually do we relay some of these benefits to local communities, and if there are any structures yet that she can foresee that have been developed in this regard. Ms. Blessing, what is the status or the nature of the bioeconomy policy in Nigeria?
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you there's a bioeconomy roadmap right now developed by the National Biosafety Management Agency, and currently is awaiting Federal Executive Council and National Executive Council approval. From the biotechnology aspect, I'll speak. It starts with the accreditation of institutions down to certification of facilities, and then constant monitoring and inspection of field trials in this aspect before whatever that is coming up is released generally to the public. But the framework itself, I have a colleague on this platform participating. He was a member of the interministerial committee that drafted this framework. Is actually awaiting approval by the Federal Executive Council. I request Mr. Onyeka Nwosu to come on board and tell us exactly what is contained in that framework. Onyeka, yes. Are you there?
Yes, Onyeka, as you come on board, I want to say we are actually running short of time. I want to also request participants, if any one of us has a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat space, but also you could raise up your hand and we give you a chance to unmute and forward your submission or question at this point. Yes, Onyeka. Onyeka is a good friend of mine. I think we've met before, online, of course, and not physically. Yeah. Yes, Onyeka.
Yeah, thank you, Paras, and thank you, Madam Blessing. Quite a nice presentation. Then as regards the issue of bioeconomy in Nigeria, Nigeria has moved forth with the other nations of the world in having a good national bioeconomy roadmap. And this roadmap was an initiative of the immediate past president to set up a national bioeconomy policy. So this bioeconomy policy, which I happen to be a member of the interministerial committee that developed the policy, we're able to bring up all aspects of the biological resources. That is the harnessing of the biological resources and its utilization together. We were able to put it together from the marine area to the plants, to the microorganisms. And today we have what we call a national bioeconomy policy, which is expected to drive the national strategic frameworks in line with this bioeconomy. And today, one of the pilot studies we are doing out of this policy is the issue of bioethanol. And we are doing pilot study across the 6 geopolitical zones of the country. And that pilot study will help the National Economic Council, headed by the Vice President of the country and his team of governors, to accept this policy, which will be moved for the president through its Federal Executive Council for approval. So we are waiting that before the year runs down, Nigeria is going to join the League of all nations of the world to have a strategic bioeconomic policy that drives its center towards promoting the economic prosperity of the nation. Because you know, here in Nigeria, we are more of oil producing, and the governments upon governments are trying as much as possible to diversify the economy. And believe you that we have put a lot of strategies and policies and institutional governances in place to be able to achieve this bioeconomy. Like Madam Mrs. Blessing has made in her presentation, for the issue of modern biotechnology, we understand that for it to contribute to the bioeconomy sector, there must be a safety valve to it. There must be a safety approval to it. And that is why a National Biosafety Management Agency is in place to ensure this. So you see there are regulatory process, there are promoting processes which have brought together to ensure that a policy is in line for Nigeria. So that is the status we are now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Onyeka. Onyeka is a friend of mine. I think we met about at the beginning of this year, and I want to really appreciate your submission on that. And when I see what's happening, you see, Nigeria has always been at least alert to always advance onto most of the developments in research and technology. That is why it was of interest to us, and I think also the participants, but also they know what exactly is happening in Nigeria. Now, Ms. Bupe, when you see the policy development in Africa, which of course, according to the guidance from some of the policymakers we have on call, when you hear from what Onyeka is saying, and Ms. Blessing is always going to be mindful of what we are trying to discuss here. We try to integrate and actually be mindful of how our local citizens, or maybe where most of these bioresources are extracted, how they benefit from the research that becomes of this. So with the GBF, as you mentioned, how are you? I don't know if you've had any partnerships so far in Africa, if you've had any successful research here in Africa where this has actually worked. I think I would also want to know one of those case studies, or maybe if there is any ongoing work right now to pursue that, because I would really want to see Africa benefit from what this research is doing. So what are some, maybe how are you overcoming some of these policy issues? You see, I think it's only South Africa and East African community here. We have a policy. I've had, I think in Egypt, I don't know if it was Egypt. I think they may also be having something in development. Namibia, now you see what's happening in Nigeria. But at least, how are you overcoming this? And what are some of, give us a case study of probably where this has worked in Africa, or maybe where it's actually being applied today.
First of all, I would like to really commend this initiative, because with open dialogue that we're now having across the continent, and especially through open discussions such as these, we can only just hope that more awareness will be raised in an understanding of this space. There's a lot of room for conservation biotechnology, as well as innovation opportunity within academia and in commercial to happen. And I think, if I can quote, I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, if you want to go far, if you want to go fast, or I can't remember how it goes, but if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I'm hoping that finally we are going somewhere together as a continent, because we are starting to have these conversations. Going back to your question about where the status of Africa, I'm not an expert, and by far I'm not claiming to be one. However, because this is my 9-to-5 job, I spend all day long engaging people about biodiversity for bioeconomy. Based on my personal experience, so far, so good. I would say there's a lot of hope for us in Africa. Especially for the young generation that is coming, that is very much alive, motivated, and engaged with technology. What has set us back in Africa to date has been the shortfall of capacities and capabilities to adopt the innovations around bioeconomy. However, there are a few countries that includes places like Kenya, of course, in South Africa, we mentioned South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, and Ghana, and to name a few, that have been taking advantage of this space for quite a while now, for 10 plus years. And therefore, there are quite a few good examples and good practices that we could look to as a set for adoption on how we can approach the blue economy and the green economy, as we are calling it now. To keep it short, I can't really discuss individual projects, so we'll be here forever, but I do see quite a few partners on the call. Some of them we are under non-disclosure agreements, so I cannot really disclose what those agreements are. But what I can tell you is there is hope, and there is a lot of opportunity coming. And I think there's much more work to do. This is just the beginning. And the GBF, which is still being adopted in many of our countries, is providing some clarity, even though there's still a lot of work to do. Where the work is required is the understanding and also the technology, the skills in capacity building. I believe you've just had this conference last week in Uganda looking at synthetic biology. It's, again, another very good initiative, because there is a lot of young people coming out of university with bioinformatics, with microbial degrees. However, there isn't enough industry in Africa for them to end up to. So hopefully together, everyone who is in the core here today, we can start working to iron out those challenges that still exist in understanding the industry and how it actually works. There's a lot of misconception that still exists around this industry, and rightly for, because the history hasn't been favorable. So it is our responsibility, each one of us on this call, to ensure that we do things ethically and rightfully going forward, so we can rewrite the narrative around the bioeconomy development. The eDNA technology, for example, that Basecamp applies in its research, it is applicable in so many other areas. So within those collaborations that we are doing in Africa, we're not just looking at developing microbial diversity research work. The skills and technology that we offer allows our partner to utilize that technology into agriculture, in soil health, in analyzing, in land management planning. So policymakers, you would probably love to hear this. It gives you molecular level data that can allow you to justify your decisions on land use, land planning, and so forth. The list is endless. Please, I've shared our email at Basecamp. You can Google us. We have a website and you can learn much more about what we do. And I look forward to engaging many more times through this platform, because I believe there's a lot of work for us to do together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Bupe. And I think, honestly, I want really to appreciate the work ongoing at Basecamp. And I'd want to see Africa really benefit from this arrangement. How I wish actually also have some of other private entities come on board to actually, look diversely onto the whole scope of the bioeconomy. Because from what you present, it seems you're so much focused into microbial biodiversity, which of course also is the most untapped, I think, part of the bioeconomy. Looking at it. So I think this is really something we need to pick on. And great enough, actually, we have so many participants here from different countries. I wasn't really keen to see where most of us are from, but I want to appreciate us for joining. And like I said, if you have any question, please feel free to raise up your hand. I should be able to see you. And Ms. Bupe, you have a question in the chat space from Onyeka. Onyeka asks, and he says, it is interesting to see private companies harnessing bioresources very involved in access and benefit sharing mechanism. So his question is, so I have Basecamp research applied ABS in harnessing biomaterials in Africa? That is his question.
Yes, sorry, I think I see the question.
Yeah.
It's Onyeka. Onyeka, thank you. That is a brilliant question. We actually, the simplest way to answer you is to say Basecamp does not engage in any accessing of any genetic resource until we have an ABS agreement in place with the provider, country or community or partner. So to your answer, yes, all our accessing of resources applies ABS as a standard. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I think it does. Onyeka, you just type in the chat space, say yes or no, and then we could jump again onto that question. Please feel free to send in questions as we conclude. I'm seeing Mr. Sakwa is a friend of mine from Kenya, and he's from academia. I really wanted a perspective from academia, and research in that case. How are we really integrating some of these aspects in our capacity building, but also skilling the young people that come out of some of these institutions so that they're actually mindful of some of these. But I don't know if, Sakwa, I think if you could have something.
I'm on. Are you getting me?
Yes, I can. Can you respond? I know it's an ambush, but I really know you have an understanding of some of these concepts. I want to know how are we integrating this? Yes, really, how are we integrating this in our skilling the young people coming out of these institutions? Because as you can see, we need to be mindful of ethics, be mindful of our cultures, be mindful of the local communities, access and and benefit, but also in research. What is informing some of this scientific research we are doing in these institutions, and how are we also having some of these plans? I think you can briefly just sum that up in just one or two statements in response to that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Perez. Good evening, everybody. My background, yes, is in academia, and I must say that the curricula we use to teach students are not static. They are reviewed, and the best way to review them is to look at what is happening in the industry or in the field, and inculcate the same in the students, because it doesn't make sense to have a student for 4 years and then you've chased them into a workshop to learn new things. It doesn't make sense. So what we do in Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology is that we connect with the industry and we look at what is happening and infuse it into the curriculum immediately, because you might not have the pleasure or luxury to wait. Time does not wait for a king. So we don't wait for the routine review by the university or by the regulators. We do it because we are professionals and we want to churn out professionals who are trained the way we were trained. So, for example, the biosafety course that we have mounted, we realized that Kenya had come up with a biorisk management curriculum for the country, which incorporates One Health. So we quickly inculcated that in the curriculum and started teaching our students instantly. While doing it, we were giving the students 2 certifications, such that when they graduate, they have a certificate in biorisk management. And then the transcript has the routine units they're supposed to do in the course of the course. That is what attracted IFBA to us to say that, do you mind then upscaling this to a degree? So IFBA found us on the way implementing. And in the year 2015, thereabout also, when the country started the issues to do with the biosafety, biosecurity, we took faculty quickly for training, and they came back and started inculcating that into the students. So what we do as a university, the first 2 years are general. It doesn't matter what you're studying, so long as you're in the Department of Medical Lab Science, whether you're doing medical biotechnology, or you're doing medical lab science, or you're going to study biosafety, biosecurity. The first 2 years, students are introduced to matters to do with research and ethics, all of them together, biosafety issues, biotechnology issues, and then in the 3rd and 4th year, they spread to their specific courses and now continue with subject-specific courses according to whatever degree they are studying. So my advice is that regulators exist to regulate what we do, but as professionals, we know what is right in terms of technological advances, new equipment, and technology as it improves. We get to learn when we attend conferences. So when you go to the conference or a workshop, you come back and inculcate that to your students immediately. That's what I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sokwa. Honestly, I missed you last week. I should have met you, but you didn't come to Uganda. You're supposed to be present for this conference as well. But I think you could see, and that is exactly what I wanted to get to understand from academia and research. How do we integrate this? And as you can see in Kenya, from his university, they have integrated this course, biosecurity and biosafety course, to really help learners understand. And I think through some of course, such a program, bioethics can't lack. And I want us to really, now I'm speaking to some of the regulators here, but also different stakeholders from different countries. I think we could pick a leaf from what's happening here in Kenya. And as you can see, also Nigeria has a very good framework. I want really to appreciate our presenters and the panelists. And thank you so much, Mr. Sokwa. I don't know if we have any questions so far. From my end, I think we really achieved the objective of this discussion. And largely, of course, we usually have these webinars monthly. And in the next month, we shall be looking at financing the bioeconomy. But in the specifics, we shall just have a presentation, a short presentation on, I'm trying to check it out here. We are going to have a discussion on how to mobilize and leverage public and private funds to develop the bioeconomy in Africa. And I want to really invite you to this discussion. And I hope when you visit our social media platforms, that is on Twitter, as Bioeconomy Coalition of Africa, also on LinkedIn. You could always find some of these engagements. Also, we're actually going to launch up our discussion on. We shall launch out our website soon. We shall invite our social media platforms. You can always go and check out the developments and some of the initiatives that we have at the coalition in Africa. And going forward, I think I want to say thank you again to the participants, and I'll be reaching out to some of us, especially people at Basecamp. We need to really continue facilitating some of these discussions, open forum for Africa, so that we actually integrate this into most countries. And in the next discussion, we shall have a representative from Malawi. We need to also see what's going on in Malawi. And I think since we didn't have a participant from Kenya, then we shall also have someone from Kenya in the next discussion to understand how are we financing the bioeconomy, or how can we really develop this bioeconomy, or where do we look to get the funds? And I think at that point also we may want to know if Basecamp really can also have a say in some of those discussions, because we need to develop this bioeconomy. And when you see with the lack of policies, I think the government may not ably fund, well, they would ably do it, but not openly do it, because with lack of that policy, I think would lack justification to really develop some of these bioeconomy integrations in the economy. So thank you so much for coming. I want to say I'm going to give each one of us the last minute, beginning with Blessing. What is your last submission? Maybe just a word or two in our discussion before we call off this meeting. But in the meantime, I hope there are no questions. I'm just checking the chat space, and there's no one raising up their hand. Miss Blessing, any last words for our participants?
Yes. Yes, in everything that is being done, it's true, everything should be science-based. All bioeconomy policies should be science-based. Not just being science-based. When we base everything on the provisions of science, we may lose the basis traditionally. So I want to recommend that whatever that is being done bioeconomically, the traditional people should be carried along. They hold knowledge, the native knowledge of what we do. They give us information, the grassroots information we need to bring up policies that will benefit everyone in the world. That is my recommendation for everyone here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blessing. I think you remind me of a discussion we had a while ago. It was about herbal medicine. And it was really unique how the local communities can actually integrate research in herbal medicine, in the herbal medicine industry. And it was really interesting. And I think what that actually informed me preparing for this webinar, I looked at some of the biopiracy issues that were discussed in that meeting, in that discussion. And it's really called for, having a mindful policy framework where we actually, I think about the local communities, research that is really ethical, research that brings back to the community. And I think you really presented to us so well. Thank you so much for that presentation. I want to invite Ms. Bupe, your last words for participants as we conclude.
Thank you. For me, last words really is just to encourage collaboration across stakeholders. It's very important, as Ms. Blessing has stated, that when we are looking at research in science, we can incorporate national priorities and interest, but also we must not forget that technology moves with time, and these are different times where as a continent we have to look at alternatives, livelihoods for our people, but also employment opportunities for our future generation. And if they miss out on opportunity for skills and technology that are applicable now and in the future, we continue being left behind as the rest of the world develop. So we must not be too fearful for change, but get involved. And I ensure we have a seat at the table when the change is happening, so we can collaborate and look at the best, safest way forward for our continent and our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for accepting our call to come and speak to us this month. I also want to appreciate Mr. Sakwa, who just jumped on and gave us that unique perspective. And I think if Professor Paul from University of Embu was here, he would have actually, I think, still narrated the same. So I want to thank you so much for coming. I'm seeing lots of participants. So we had someone from Malawi. Thank you so much for joining us.
May I actually note also on that note of a colleague from Malawi, I didn't realize that they are on the call as well. Professor Kadawa, thank you for joining the call. Now, maybe Perez, you can make a special allowance for Professor Kadawa to tell you which institute he's representing, and they're very much involved in developing the bioeconomy in Africa.
Yes, that is really fine. Yes, Professor Wilf, please.
Thank you very much. And my apologies, I was just silently taking parts and taking notes. But I'm, of course, from Malawi, working with the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And we are in ecosystems management, environmental management issues, and the human health side of things. Recently started working on One Health elements and biodiversity informatics. But crucially, we were invited to this forum by Madam Bupe, because we have embarked on a journey working together with Basecamp. We're still in the early stages, getting all the permits and putting things in place for the exciting work that we're looking forward to undertaking together with Basecamp for the next couple of years, maybe 3 years from now. But thanks to Bupe for the introduction, and we look forward to taking part in these programs going forward. That's all I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Honestly, this is amazing. And I was also trying to introduce a colleague of mine, Steve Malemia. He was here for the conference too, from Malawi. And I think he should be joining us as a team here at the coalition. Thank you so much for joining in, Professor. And I hope going forward, of course, we should have some of these engagements and try to speak and advance the bioeconomy in Africa. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ms. Bupe. I was trying to go through here to see some of participants we have. I'm seeing people from Kenya, from Malawi. I think I'm not missing me. I'm having Nigeria. Yes, thank you for joining. I want to not take so much of our time here. I'm going to invite you for our next webinar, which is we are going to put up a call, and I think we shall put up a registration link for that. And going forward, of course, some of these discussions we hope really what are going to integrate the bioeconomy in Africa, and we hope it can actually drive policy development, but also the research and development in that space. Thank you so much for coming. I remain Perez, and I'm the deputy coordinator at the coalition. My boss is actually also on the call, Mr. Ian. I wouldn't want really to leave this forum without recognizing him. I may lose my job. Otherwise, thank you for coming, and I'll be talking to you next month. Have a good evening or afternoon.
Good evening too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.